killed him for money. And for a woman. And I didn't get the money, and I didn't get the woman.
Los Angeles. From sweeping panoramas made famous by the epic Hollywood westerns, to the rising, monolithic skyscrapers of futuristic and dystopian LA, to dark and alienated noirscapes, landscape has become central to Los Angeles' cinematic space. Geographer Jeff Hopkins argues that the core enjoyment of a film is a testament to its capacity to create its very own cinematic geography. In this newly conceived landscape, varying social and cultural constructs, as well as meanings of place, are defined and complicated. Hopkins asserts that analyzing the cinematic landscape of film will ultimately allow the viewer to map the various elements that make up the political geography of cinema. Hopkins explains that an illusion of the real world is created in films through the rapid succession of iconic signs and images that allow the viewer to fully experience and understand the conceived cinematic place. A cinematic landscape is a filmed illustration of either a real or fictionalized environment. When all the elements of motion picture technology are amalgamated, photographic picture, illusionary depth, and sound, etc., it produces an environment where tangible and intangible realities, fact and fiction, are construed. Although our perception of reality can be manipulated by many different kinds of creative mediums, film is the most powerful because of its natural realism and its ability to represent a certain kind of actuality through sights and sounds. The medium harbors the capacity to falsely portray the true attributes of both the social and material world. In essence, our understanding of cinematic landscapes are inevitably mediated by culture, attitude, and experience.
Perhaps one of the most noticeable genres of LA is film noir, which later led to the development of neo-noir. The emerging film noir of the early 1940s included many distinct aesthetic and narrative elements that helped to create a unique and definable cinematic landscape. Cornell University professor Barbara Mennel outlines the fundamental tenets of film noir in her book Cities and Cinema. According to Mennel, film noir emphasizes the black and white qualities of light and shadow that create space and mood through low-key and chiaroscuro lighting. Cameras are oftentimes positioned in a way that skews the angles of the film, and lonely characters in empty urban spaces evoke a sense of urban alienation. This alienation, Mennel argues, is caused in part by the expressionist style of film noir that produces an alienated effect when combined with realist depictions of urban spaces. The classic setting for a crime drama, the cities of film noir are oftentimes captured at night or early morning and during rainstorms, when shadowy figures lurk the streets and a sense of widespread moral corruption is abundant. Furthermore, the narratives of film noir are, more often than not, structured through flashbacks where the male protagonist, in a crisis of masculinity, narrates the events that led to the film's opening scene. The presence of broken, corrupt, and dysfunctional families that betray one another is also central to the social structure of film noir and contributes to some of the psychoanalytic aspects of the genre. Popularizing Freudian psychoanalysis, Mennel argues film noir's emphasis on psychology of crime, moral corruption of seemingly good characters, and the psychosomatic effects of executing a murder motive all helped to define the genre for the 40s and 50s audience. Film noirs like Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, 1944, Howard Hawks' The Big Sleep, 1946, Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, 1950, and Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, 1953, classically exemplify the genre.
Although major studios continued to release films classified under the noir genre well into the mid-1950s, the cinema style had all but disappeared by the 1960s. However, in the early 1970s, film critics began to classify a new genre of films that implemented many of the same elements of film noir. The genre of neo-noir was epitomized by the release of Roman Polanski's 1974 film Chinatown, maintaining many elements of the crime drama narrative, but updated with color cinematography and more graphic references to violence and sexual content. Chinatown is a prime example of the cinematic resurgence of the noir style. Films like The French Connection, Blade Runner, and Taxi Driver continue to contribute to the genre. When considering from a historical perspective the emergence of the film noir genre, it can be argued that the noir genre and the noir cinematic landscape was heavily influenced by the sentiment of intense cynicism and disillusionment that was present in American society and culture in the 1930s. Having witnessed the precipitous failure of the capitalist model and the collapse of the industrial machine that devastated the middle-class populace, there was an overall loss of faith among many in the perceived goodness of society. The oftentimes untrustworthy, backstabbing characters and the many similar figures that have come to define film noir narratives contribute to the larger emotional representation of a time when fear, uncertainty of the future, and the struggle to survive dominated American life. The gloomy and discouraging cynicism of film noir's historical setting is manifested by a dark, cold, and isolated view of Los Angeles.
Similarly, a historical explanation can be sought for the emergence of neo-noir in the early 1970s. Similar factors surrounding the widespread social turmoil of the 1960s and the early 1970s heavily influenced the cinematic and literary works of the time, just as the events of the Great Depression had precipitated a negative and sudden cultural shift during the 1930s. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated while campaigning in Dallas, Texas, in a tragedy that traumatized America. The U.S. escalation of the unpopular Vietnam War, the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King in 1968, the turmoil of the Civil Rights Movement, and Watergate in the fall of President Richard Nixon only added to an emerging culture of corruption and cynicism that heavily influenced the aesthetic and narrative content of neo-noir.
Based on both of these periods of historical turmoil in the United States, it would appear that the noir and the neo-noir genres of LA share a direct correlation to the overall discontent with the moral and political deterioration of American society. This evolution within LA's culture presented many influences and avenues for writers and filmmakers to explore. This, in turn, provided a unique link to the continually changing structures of Los Angeles from the 1940s to the late 1970s.